I refused to co-sign a loan for my grandson, and that's when my own family quietly turned against me.
You won't cosign your own grandson's loan? Then don't expect to stay here for long. Her words sliced through the kitchen like a knife. My daughter stood in the center, spatula in hand, voice sharp, precise, like vinegar on a wound I hadn't yet acknowledged. I didn't answer right away. At 76, I'd learned that silence often carries more weight than words. The dish towel I held was warm from drying plates. Zach had just left the room, his sneakers squeaking on the laminate floor, leaving behind the echo of impatience. "It's just a formality, Grandma," Lydia said again, softer this time. "I've got a job, I'm not asking for money." I studied her face while folding the towel slowly. Her eyes were bright with expectation, her jaw tight. But I knew what that formality meant. Cosigning a loan for a 20-year-old with a fragile checking account was no formality at all. "I raised him better," Lydia muttered, shoving the pan into the sink. Water splashed, a small, cold rebellion. "He needs a car for work, he's trying, but trying's apparently not enough for you." I folded the towel carefully. "He's got energy, he's got time. He can take the bus a while longer." Her eyes narrowed. "We took you in, didn't we? After your surgery, we rearranged everything. That back room could have been my office, but we made space." It was true. I had moved in after the hip replacement when stairs became dangerous. They had made space, and I was grateful, or so I thought. But the gratitude that had once been natural now tasted bitter. "Don't think you can just sit here and not be part of this family," she added, quieter, a dangerous gentleness in her tone. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't the little girl I had braided hair for. She was a woman carrying a mortgage, a career, a son unready for responsibility. And I realized then that I wasn't just part of their world to be managed. I was a person with my own will. My signature wasn't free. That night I lay in bed, the shadows long across the ceiling. My body ached not from age but from the weight of knowing I no longer belonged, not in the way I thought I did. Somewhere between her words and his expectations, something shifted inside me, not spite, not anger, but clarity. Around midnight, my lamp flickered once and went out. At first, I thought it was a fuse. I checked the lamp, the outlet. Nothing. The rest of the house glowed gently, the hallway light, the blue flicker of the television in the living room. Only my room was dark. I lay there, staring into the void, swallowed by the black, and realized the silence in the house felt colder than the draft from the poorly sealed window. I reached for the switch again, flicked it twice, nothing. I got out of bed slowly, knees stiff, joints protesting. I pulled on my robe, shuffled across the floor in wool socks, and cracked the door just enough to see the hallway. Warm, golden light spilled out, soft and steady. Everything else was working. I stood there a long moment, listening. My room remained dark, a hollow pocket in the middle of familiarity. I closed the door carefully, feeling the weight of it settle. The darkness wasn't a mistake. It wasn't random. It was a message, a pause, a chance to see clearly what had been blurred for too long. Morning came. The sun crept through the thin curtains, spilling light across the counter where the spatula had been left. Zach was gone, Lydia humming softly to herself as she sorted the breakfast dishes. Not a word was mentioned about the darkness of the night. Not a glance. They had forgotten or they had chosen to ignore it. And maybe that was what made it mine. I poured my tea slowly, letting the warmth settle into my hands, and for the first time in weeks I felt a small, solid certainty. I wasn't here to be a prop in their story. I wasn't here to facilitate their lives. I was here for myself, and I would make sure of it. The house breathed around me, familiar and indifferent, and I realized something else. The space I inhabited, the walls, the floorboards, the quiet corners was mine. It had always been mine, and I wouldn't hand it over because someone demanded it. The day stretched forward, ordinary and soft. But I felt a quiet pulse inside me, something patient and resolute. A thought repeated itself like a mantra: I belong here, not because they let me, not because they expect me, because I choose to. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to make them understand that. Zach had already left for work when I walked into the kitchen. Lydia stood at the counter, coffee in hand, scrolling through her phone. Sunlight hit her hair, but it did nothing to soften the sharpness in her gaze. "Good morning," I said softly. She nodded without looking up, the kind of nod that says, "I hear you, but I don't see you." I reached for my teacup, filled the kettle, and stood beside her in silence. The quiet was thick, pressing against my temples. It was the kind of silence that feels almost physical, like something in the house was holding its breath, waiting. "My light didn't work last night," I said quietly, more a statement than an accusation. She shrugged. "Maybe something tripped." "Everything else was fine," I said, another shrug. "You'll have to ask Zach, he was fiddling with the breakers the other day." I didn't respond. I moved to the far end of the table, letting the sun warm my hands as I stirred my tea slowly, the spoon clinking against the porcelain like a clock counting seconds I could no longer trust. I could have asked why Zach would touch the breaker panel, but I knew better. Pushing would only make me the problem, the one who didn't belong. I'd spent a lifetime keeping the house steady, the routines gentle, meals warm. And now they were chipping away at that piece by piece, without confrontation, without words. Later that afternoon, I checked the breaker box myself. Everything was perfect. Every switch upright, every wire neat, nothing out of place. Nothing that physically said sabotage, and yet the message lingered, subtle, insidious, a quiet warning: you are no longer welcome here. The next night it was the outlet. My heating pad, the only relief for my hip, refused to work. Tried every plug in the kitchen, dead, carried it to the hallway, worked fine there. Slowly, deliberately, they were taking away comfort, one piece at a time. I didn't speak of it. I went about my day as if nothing had changed. Cooked when asked, folded laundry, fed the cat, answered Zach's half-hearted hellos with polite nods. But at night, sitting in the dim room, lamp dead, the weight of the message pressed against me. It's strange, the way a home can feel alien. Your presence shifts from necessary to tolerated. You move cautiously, speak softly, ask fewer questions. Every word becomes a disturbance, every breath a liability. I started sitting by the window each evening, watching the cul-de-sac. Other houses glowed with life, porch lights, cars returning, neighbors chatting while carrying groceries. Families existed in rhythms I once knew intimately. In my house, the rhythm had shifted, threaded with tension I hadn't invited. I watched a young father guide his toddler into the house next door, hand in hand, laughter spilling across the lawn. I watched a couple returning from work, arguing softly but kindly, their voices blending into the evening like music. And I realized I had not been watching my own family in this way for months, because there was little to see that was gentle, nothing that felt steady. The thought came quietly that night: you could leave. It hovered at the edge of my mind, hesitant at first, then persistent. Leave, not anger, not revenge, just the breath you draw after almost drowning. Autonomy, space to exist without someone else measuring every move. I had enough to leave, not lavishly, not with extravagance, but enough for something quiet, mine. A modest pension, savings tucked away, the memory of Derek and me, the life we built before the world seemed intent on claiming it. Enough to reclaim a corner of my world. I pictured the small apartment I could rent, one with sunlight spilling through clean windows, no reminders of expectations, no subtle punishments for existing. I could have a tiny table, a soft chair, and a lamp that actually worked. And perhaps the freedom to make mistakes unobserved, unjudged. That night I slept for the first time in weeks. Not deeply, not long, but without waking to flicking lights or soft, invasive footsteps. Sleep came because the idea of leaving, of reclaiming even a small measure of control, had settled like a stone in my chest. The next morning, I brewed my tea and let the warmth fill my hands. Lydia remained at the counter, unaware, scrolling, oblivious. I let the kettle hum, the steam curl, and I thought, tomorrow I will call the bank, not to beg. Not for approval, just to see how much of my life remains mine to decide. A quiet smile touched my lips. For the first time in weeks, the weight lifted, not because they had acknowledged me, but because I had acknowledged myself. Because in a house full of people who seemed determined to control every aspect of my life, I had realized I still had power. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The bank teller's voice was soft, careful, the kind of voice designed to soothe without actually saying anything. "Yes, Mrs. Carver, your checking account is active. Would you like me to go over your current balance?" I sat on the edge of the guest bed, my bed, though it barely felt like mine anymore, clutching the cordless phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I could feel the tiny tremor running up my arm, not from fear, but from the pulse of possibility. I whispered, "Yes, please," almost afraid my own voice would betray me. She read the number, calm and measured. Not much, but it was mine. Mine to spend, mine to guard, mine to decide. I thanked her, hung up, and set the receiver down slowly. My fingers lingered on the handset, reluctant to release control over even this small tether to my independence. Later, at the kitchen table, Lydia tapped away on her laptop, earbuds in, the soft clatter of keys and the low hum of a podcast filling the silence between us. I didn't ask for attention. I waited, letting the pause stretch. Eventually, she sighed, removed the earbud, and glanced up, eyes sharp. Something wrong? I hesitated. Every word had weight. Every confession might shift the balance in the house, in our relationship, in the life I still wanted to protect. Do you remember that little trust account Derek and I opened? The one for emergencies? Her eyes narrowed. The one you said you weren't touching? Yes, I said softly. I might use it. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, cautious. For what? I haven't decided yet, I murmured, stirring the tea slowly, letting the steam curl upward like smoke from a forgotten fire. But I think it's time I start making plans. For myself, she frowned, her lips pressed together. Mom, if this is about the loan, it's not, I interrupted gently but firmly. I met her gaze steady. It's about space. I don't feel like I belong here anymore. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, the kind that presses against your chest and settles into your bones. You're overreacting, she said finally, voice tight. We've all had a rough month. You're taking everything too personally. I nodded slowly. Maybe, but I knew better. I had learned over decades to recognize the faint signals, the small ways people push you out before they even notice it. The rest of the week passed in brittle civility. I folded laundry in silence, refilled the bird feeder, and kept to my own rhythm. Zach barely spoke to me except once when he asked if I'd seen his car keys. I hadn't. He muttered under his breath and walked away. I let it pass, storing my patience like a small victory. On Friday morning, I walked 3 blocks to the library, taking the long route past the park where the leaves had begun to turn, where children's laughter floated over the metal slides, untethered and free. At the library, I found a computer near the window and scanned listings, apartments for rent, studios, small senior communities, anything under $1,000. Most were either too far or too worn down to trust. But one caught my eye, a small 1-bedroom on Linwood Avenue. It had a porch and a shared garden. No stairs, utilities included. I printed the listing, folded it carefully, and slid it into my purse. It felt almost sacred. Something solid, tangible, a lifeline in a house where my voice often went unheard. Back home, I placed the paper on the nightstand beside the unplugged lamp, a quiet reminder that plans could still exist without permission. That evening, while chopping onions for dinner, Lydia lingered near the counter, wine glass in hand. The kitchen smelled of garlic, simmering sauce, and memories of meals I had once prepared alone for a family who still pretended I belonged. You know, she said lightly, trying to mask the sharp edge beneath her voice, I talked to Zach. He's still really upset. I didn't stop chopping. The knife rose and fell with deliberate calm. He'll get over it. She hesitated, watching me, then said softly, well, maybe he wouldn't feel that way if you hadn't been so quick to shut him down. I put down the knife. My hands hovered for a moment, trembling not with fear but with the steady power of clarity. I didn't shut him down, I said calmly. I protected myself. She rolled her eyes, a dismissive gesture that barely hid irritation. He's family, isn't that what family's for? I looked her straight in the eye. To sign for loans they can't afford, to sit quietly while their room goes dark at night. Is that your version of family? The words hung in the air, heavy and final. She didn't answer. She turned, lifted her wine glass, and walked away, leaving me in the rhythm of the kitchen, the smell of onions, the faint simmer of sauce, the quiet certainty that at 76 I still had choices. I returned to chopping, each slice a measured step back toward myself. Even in a house that tried to dim my presence, I remembered, independence is not given. It is taken carefully, deliberately, one decision at a time. That night, I dialed the number from the listing. My fingers shook a little, though I pretended they didn't. A gentle voice answered, a woman named Neen. She told me the unit was still available and said I could come see it Monday morning. I thanked her, though my voice nearly vanished under the weight of my own heartbeat. When I hung up, I looked around the room. My room, temporary room, the dresser I had polished, the curtains I hemmed to soften the sun, none of it belonged to me. I had borrowed this space out of necessity, out of the quiet desperation of someone with nowhere else to land. But now I needed something else. Something Lydia couldn't offer, no matter how tidy the sheets or how neatly she cut the fruit. Peace, a place without invisible strings attached. Saturday, when the house was empty, I began sorting my things. I opened the bottom drawer of the old dresser, the one that groaned every time it opened, and pulled out the file folder I kept buried beneath scarves. Inside were papers untouched for years: Derek's death certificate, the deed to our first house, faded photographs, and the small cream-colored envelope he had labeled for later. His handwriting twisted something deep inside me. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I just held it for a moment, letting its familiar weight remind me that once I had belonged somewhere. I moved on to the closet. 2 nice dresses, a few cardigans, slippers, the coat with worn cuffs. Not much. My entire life could fit into 4, maybe 5 boxes. The thought didn't sting. If anything, it felt like unclenching a fist I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. That evening, I sat in the backyard with a shawl around my shoulders, watching the violet dusk settle across the roofs. Through the kitchen window, Lydia's voice drifted out, sharper than she probably intended. "She's been acting strange," she said. "Like she's planning something. You know how she gets." A pause. "No, I didn't ask again about the loan. What's the point?" She made it clear. My chest tightened, familiar, old, tired. Another pause. "She should be grateful," Lydia added softly. "We took her in. I rearranged my life. I made room." I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. Veined, dry, shaped by decades of work, hands that once tied her shoes, wiped her fevers, braided her hair before school. Had she really forgotten, or had I simply held onto memories she'd outgrown long ago? I stood slowly, my knees creaking, and slipped back inside without making a sound. Monday came earlier than expected, as moments of significance often do. I dressed carefully: navy shoes, a clean blouse, my good skirt, and tucked a notepad into my purse to look prepared, decision-making, self-governing. The Linwood house was smaller than I imagined. A little square living room, a narrow kitchen, a bedroom just big enough for a twin bed, but sunlight filled every corner. The windows were wide, the air fresh. Outside, a thin strip of grass cradled a small porch hung with wind chimes. "This is our last available unit," Neen said gently. "Mostly widows here. It's quiet, safe. And if you ever need help, the landlord lives right next door." There was no judgment in her voice, no tension, no sense that I needed to hurry up or shrink down. "It's peaceful," I murmured. I hadn't realized how loud Lydia's house had become until I stood in that quiet room, no footsteps thudding upstairs, no television droning endlessly, no sense of needing to stay out of the way. For the first time in months, the silence felt warm instead of cold. I filled out the application at her small desk. When I handed it back, she looked it over and smiled. "If everything checks out, you'll hear from us by the end of the week." She gave me a pamphlet about the community garden. "You can plant something if you'd like, most of the ladies do." "Maybe tomatoes," I said. "Or lavender." My voice sounded different, hopeful almost. When I returned home, no one noticed I had been gone. Zach was in the garage trying to fix something he probably couldn't fix. Lydia was out shopping. I slipped into my room unseen, placed the lease packet into my drawer, and sat on the edge of the bed. Something was different, not in them, but in me. For so long, I had waited for people to notice me, to be kind, to remember who I used to be in their lives, to offer softness without strings. But now I wasn't waiting. I was planning. I was leaving. Soon, I would no longer be a guest tiptoeing around the edges of someone else's home. I would have my own space, small, quiet, sunlit, a space where I could breathe without permission, a space with my own warmth, my own peace, my own keys. Zach knocked once before pushing my door open. There was no polite preamble, no "may I come in?" Just the hard sound of his hand against the wood and the click of the handle. The familiarity of it should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It was sharp, intrusive, like a gust of wind through a cracked window. I looked up from my crossword, pencil poised, the ink faintly smudged from hours of steady work. The words on the page, simple, innocent, suddenly felt like a fragile barrier between us, a tiny wall I'd built to keep control in the middle of chaos. "Can we talk?" he asked, already stepping inside. His cologne hit me first, strong and too sweet, overpowering, or perhaps it was just that my senses had grown sharper, more particular with age. "Of course," I said, setting the puzzle on the nightstand. He didn't sit. He lingered near the dresser, arms crossed, posture rigid, like he was bracing himself for a confrontation or a confession. The room felt smaller with him standing there, tension folding around us like damp sheets. "I don't get it," he began, voice tight. "It's not like I asked for money, I needed your signature, you know that, right?" I nodded. "I do, and you still said no?" "Yes." He let out a bitter laugh, sharp and dry. "You don't trust me." "I trust you," I replied slowly, choosing my words as carefully as I had chosen battles my whole life, to be who you are right now. But right now, that young man is learning. He's figuring things out. And that means he will make mistakes. And that's fine. But I won't risk what little independence I have left on a signature you may not be ready to carry. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a language foreign to him, a dialect only shaped by decades of knowing limits. "You think I'm irresponsible," he said, voice lower, softer, almost pleading. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched across his face. "You've been living here rent-free. Mom cooks, cleans. I do my share," I interrupted gently. "I cook, I clean, I help when needed, I pay for my own groceries. And if you believe I am a burden, say it plainly. Don't wrap it in words like rent or favor." His shoulders slumped slightly. That pause told me more than words could. He hadn't expected to be challenged. "I just thought you'd help. You always help." "I have helped many times," I said calmly, softly. "When your mother's first car broke down, when she needed braces, when your school trip wasn't covered. I helped because I wanted to, not because it was expected. Helping isn't the same as enabling." He shifted from one foot to the other, discomfort growing. "So you're punishing me?" "No, Zach," I said, my voice steady, careful. "I'm protecting both of us. You from a debt you may not be ready to carry, me from losing the little independence I've left." He glanced at the unplugged lamp in the corner, then back at me. "Did you unplug that?" "No," I said quietly, letting the stillness hang. A pause followed, the kind of silence that stretches long and makes the air heavy. Then he asked softer, almost uncertain, "So, what now?" I met his eyes. "Now we go on, you make your choices, I make mine. But you don't get to guilt me into cosigning, not with family, not with history, not with love." He didn't reply immediately, just nodded slowly and left the room, closing the door with more force than necessary. The sound echoed down the hallway and reminded me that boundaries once drawn have weight. I sat for a long time after he left, hand resting on the pencil, crossword half finished. Saying no, especially to someone you've loved since the day they were born, extracts something from you, something old and tender that you can't just replace. But it also gives something back. A fragment of yourself reclaimed from the years of quiet compliance. Dinner was tense. Lydia didn't speak, passed the butter wordlessly, avoided my eyes. Zach didn't come down at all. I cleared my own plate, rinsed it, left the kitchen spotless, and returned to the quiet sanctuary of my room. There, I packed a single box, a trial run for what might come later. My photo albums, a small keepsake box holding my wedding ring, the note from Derek, a scarf that still carried the faint scent of lilac. I taped the box securely, slid it under the bed, and felt a solid weight in my hands. It was more than a box. It was a small act of reclamation. A declaration that I still had control, that I could protect the pieces of my life that mattered most, that even in a house not entirely mine, with people who took my presence for granted, I could still make space for myself. I sat back, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Outside, the night deepened. I breathed in the stillness and let it settle into my bones. The decision to say no to protect myself had not been easy. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like the right one. And in that moment, I understood clearly, the independence I had left wasn't just about money or space or permission. It was about being seen. About being recognized as someone who still mattered. And no one, not Zach, not Lydia, could take that from me. Tuesday morning, I called the bank again. Not the main line. I asked for Miss Haverson, the branch manager I'd spoken to years ago, after Derek passed, and again when I had to open a separate account away from Lydia's oversight. She remembered me. "Mrs. Carver," she said warmly. "How can I help you today?" I explained my situation carefully, not the heartbreak, not the tension in Lydia's house, but simply the facts. I was preparing to rent a place of my own. I needed to know how much I could safely draw from my savings without penalties, and I wanted guidance on automatic payments for rent and utilities. Miss Haverson listened patiently. "You've been frugal," she said. "Even with modest rent, careful planning means you could manage just fine for years." I thanked her, wrote the numbers neatly in my notebook, each figure a quiet confirmation that my life was still mine. Hanging up, I felt a subtle lift in my chest, a lightness absent for too long. Then I called Neen. Yes, it's still available, she said with a spark of excitement. We just finished maintenance touch-ups yesterday. Would you like to reserve it? I glanced at the box under my bed. Yes, please mark it as taken. Wonderful, deposit and first month's rent Friday, we'll have the key ready. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The tired eyes looking back weren't just from age, they were weary from holding back, from tiptoeing in a house that smiled while quietly testing me. I ran a brush through my hair, laced my walking shoes, and stepped outside without a word. 3 blocks later, I stopped at the corner coffee shop. I ordered a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, something I hadn't had in decades. I sat by the window, sunlight spilling across my hands, and sipped slowly. For the first time in months, I felt untethered. No one's expectations, no one's guilt. I pulled out my notebook and made a list. Call utility companies, request mail, forwarding pack essentials, first inform doctor of new address, leave a note for Lydia, or don't. I left the last line blank. Some things didn't need explanation. Back home, the house was still. Zach was gone. Lydia was upstairs on a work call. I went straight to my room and began packing box number 2. Books, stationery, my sewing kit, and a small clock Derek had given me years ago, inscribed, "Time is what we share." I wrapped it carefully. Later that night, Lydia knocked softly. "Can we talk?" I looked up from the half-packed box. Of course, she stepped in, eyes scanning the open drawers and scattered boxes. "You're leaving?" I nodded. "Yes." "When?" "Friday." She froze. "So that's it, you just decided?" "I didn't think you'd be happy for me," she laughed bitterly. "You're twisting everything. We gave you a room, we tried." "Yes," I said softly, "you gave me a room, but not a place." Her eyes glistened, but tears never came. "You think you'll be happier alone? I think I'll be freer alone." "That's not the same thing." "No," I said. "It isn't, and Zach, he's still upset. He'll recover, he's young, love isn't a contract." She didn't respond, simply left, closing the door behind her. I was left in the hush of my room. That night I lay awake, not anxious, not afraid, but aware something profound had shifted. This wasn't rebellion. This was reclamation, my dignity, my space, my peace. Wednesday I packed the last few treasures that made the room mine. My nightgown, the crocheted throw I'd stitched during chemo, and a small tin of buttons from my mother. Everything else, the mattress, curtains, furniture, had never been mine. Mid-morning, Lydia called. "Do you need anything from the store?" "No, thank you," I said calmly. She didn't ask where I was going or why I was packing. It was easier to pretend this was just another room cleared for repainting, another load of laundry. Around noon, I found an old photograph tucked in a book, a summer picnic. Lydia at 10, Zach a baby in my arms, Derek grinning with that ridiculous fishing hat. Sunlight gilded our faces, a plaid blanket under us, a jug of lemonade nearby. I held it long, not with sadness but with acknowledgement. That had been a good day, a happy day. I set it in the keep close box, then walked to the mailbox and mailed 3 envelopes. One to the power company, one to the post office, one to my doctor. Simple notices, change of address effective next week. Please update records accordingly. I didn't tell Lydia I'd leave Friday morning. I didn't want drama, tears, or manipulation. I knew she couldn't stop me. She'd probably watch me go with the conflicted, relieved expression she used when donating clothes to Goodwill. Zach never spoke to me. I heard the keys jingle, the car engine growl, fading down the driveway. I didn't care. That evening, I wrote a grocery list for the new apartment: oatmeal, fresh apples, strong black tea, strawberry preserves, rye crackers, whole milk. Cocoa mix, simple, quiet things. Sitting by the window, I watched the streetlight flicker, wind chimes tinkling across the road. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for change, apology, or understanding. I was here. And that was enough. 2 more nights. Then Friday morning, my name on a lease, my hand on a doorknob, my peace waiting behind it. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner, a clean kind of quiet, not the muffled stillness of a borrowed room, but a space waiting to be lived in. Real quiet. My quiet. Neen handed me the keys with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Carver, welcome home." The metal felt cold and unfamiliar in my palm. I closed my fingers around it slowly. "Thank you," I said. "It's been a long time since something felt like mine." She helped me carry in the first few boxes, books, linens, 2 ceramic mugs, Derek's photo. She didn't pry, just pointed out the mailbox and the garden out back. "If you need anything, I'm in 3 billion, she said before leaving. When the door shut, the silence wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I stood in the center of the living room, turning a slow circle. The hardwood creaked gently under my slippers. The heater hummed, steady and warm. Outside the window, the shared garden was pushing into spring, small flowers stubbornly breaking through the soil. I placed Derek's photo on the windowsill and unpacked the groceries I'd chosen for myself. There was only one chair, an old wooden one I'd rescued from Lydia's kitchen. I placed it beside the window, boiled water in the kettle, and made a cup of tea. It tasted different here, stronger, freer. For the first hour, I simply sat and watched the sunlight move across the floorboards. By afternoon, I unpacked my sewing kit and crossword book, laid a throw blanket over the chair, and hung my 2 good dresses in the tiny closet. Half the place was still boxed, but somehow it already felt more like home than Lydia's house ever had. Dinner was simple, lentil soup I'd brought in a thermos. No comments, no tension across a table. I washed the bowl and put it away, then changed into my nightgown. That's when the phone rang. Lydia. She hadn't called during the move, not when she'd walked into the empty room, not when she noticed the drawers cleared. But now at 8:43 p.m. she was calling. I let it ring. The voicemail blinked once. I didn't listen to it. I put the phone face down and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled like lavender. I'd packed them with dried sachets out of habit, my habit, not hers. Staring through the small window at the faint stars, I whispered into the quiet, "I'm here." And that was enough. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, expecting noise, footsteps, doors, but there was only stillness. I brewed real coffee, stepped onto the small porch, and breathed in the crisp spring air. Across the courtyard, a woman in a cardigan watered her plants. "New neighbor," she called. "Yes," I said, "moved in yesterday." "Welcome, I'm Rita, 2A. We have a walking group on Thursdays." "Maybe I'll join," I said, lifting my mug. Inside, I finally listened to the voicemail. Lydia's voice. "Mom, I saw your room. I guess this is real. Zach's upset. I'm upset. It feels like you just disappeared. I wish you'd told me where you were going." No apology, no concern. Just discomfort. I deleted it. By noon, I'd unpacked almost everything except the box with the old photo albums and Derek's letter. I slid it under the bed. Some memories could wait. In the afternoon, I walked to the small market and bought yellow tulips, my favorite. "Someone special?" the teen at the counter asked. "Yes," I said, "me." Back home, I placed them in a jar on the table. The phone rang again later, Zach this time. I didn't check the voicemail. I turned on the radio instead, letting soft classical music fill the room. For the first time in years, I felt no need to explain myself. No one could reach into my silence anymore or shape my days. This space was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole.